say again, thank you all so much for doing this. I'm so excited. Hilary, I don't have your book yet. I'm dying to see it. And as I mentioned earlier when Sarah got on here, I've been a fan of Frock flicks for years. This is such a delight for me. I'm great. This is the best favor I've ever done for anybody. I mean, for Anna. So yeah, we'll start with introductions here. I'm going to say, welcome to the Velveteague Library's mini virtual Jane Austen Festival. This is our costume panel discussion today. Joining us are Hilary Davidson, who's a dress and textile historian, curator and archaeologist, who works between Sydney and London. She's lectured, published, and broadcast extensively in her fields, including a major book published last year on Regency fashion, Dress in the Age of Jane Austen. Welcome, Hilary.
Hi.
Trystan L. Bass is the self-appointed editor-in-chief of Frock Flicks and has spent 30 plus years making and wearing historical costumes to romp around in. Her career writing and editing at high-tech companies helps to fund fabric purchases. We can all get on board with that. Welcome, Trystan. Kendra Van Cleave writes for Frock Flicks, makes reproduction historical costumes, and conducts scholarly research on fashion history. She lives in Berkeley, California, where, for her day job, she's an academic librarian. Not a bad day job, Kendra. Welcome.
Thank you.
Sarah Lorraine has an undergraduate degree in clothing and textile design and a master's in art history and visual culture, with an emphasis on fashion history in Western society prior to the Industrial Revolution. When she's not caught in paralyzing existential dread, she's drinking craft cocktails and writing about historical costume in film and television for Frock Flicks. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
And I'm Laura Whitlock. I'll be your moderator for this discussion. I'm an educator, freelance milliner, ager dyer, and costume craftsperson for film, television, theater, and opera here in the Chicago area. And I'm also a member of our local chapter of the Jane Austen Society of North America, Greater Chicago region. So welcome. I'd like to get started because the title of our discussion today is Frock Flicks and the Bill and Ted Test. Hilary, you're the genius behind the Bill and Ted Test. Would you mind explaining to us, for those of you who haven't heard of it, what that means? Intriguing.
So one day when I was doing something incredibly tedious on the book, there's a lot of really boring things in a book like indexing. I just was watching stuff, and I was watching Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which is a film that I love. And because Regency dress was right at the top of my eyeballs, by the time they got to the Beethoven scene where they kidnap Beethoven, it's a 10, 20-second scene. I suddenly sort of went, wait a sec, that's really good Regency dress, because, I've seen a lot of it. And I had to sort of stop and look, and I was like, wait, they've got the hair right, they've got this right. And I suddenly realized, this was sort of last year, that this was now my benchmark, that this was so good that this was my benchmark for kind of assessing Regency dress in screens, in adaptations. So once I kind of got locked down in Britain, quite unexpectedly, I decided just to start a Twitter account to amuse myself and, apply the Bill and Ted test to screen adaptations, just sort of really because I thought it would be funny and I just wanted to see. So I started it and it took off most surprisingly. Once Slate wrote an article about it, thanks Slate, it got a lot of followers, and it still brings me a lot of pleasure.
It brings everybody a lot of pleasure. The timing was excellent during the lockdown when we were all bored to tears. It was such a fun concept, something to look at, something pretty to think about, and not so pretty in some cases. Trystan, would you mind telling everybody what Frock Flicks is all about?
So Frock Flicks started as a podcast about 8 years ago, but at least
2007. That was our first podcast.
Now, it was a very infrequent podcast. We averaged about one episode a year. So, And then after a few years, we decided, you know what? Audio recording and stuff, we're not so great at that. But you know what we're really good at? We're good at writing. So we started a blog about 6 years ago now. And what we do, it's basically the three of us we started watching, we are customers, we love history, we love historical costume, but you watch movies and TV shows with historical costume in them, and sometimes you're just like, what are they wearing? So and sometimes it's great. Sometimes there's things that are just, oh, it's amazing, it's beautiful, it's perfect. Yeah, but those are the minority. So we started the blog, and that really took off. And so now we publish 5 times a week. We review movies and TV shows, current ones, past ones. We have features like Man Candy Monday and Woman Crush Wednesday, where we look at actors or historical figures on film and look at their costumes and their performances. And we also have a thing every January called Snark Week, where we do nothing but critique. Humorously, we hope. It's all about ripping to shreds the worst of the worst. And it's a fun time. So that's Frockflix in a nutshell. And it's seriously, it's a passion project for the 3 of us.
Kendra and Sarah, do you have anything to add?
I think that was a pretty good summary. I guess I'll just again say sometimes we're reviewing what's on, Masterpiece Theater right now, and sometimes we're going back to, a classic. I'm trying to, like, Sense and Sensibility is on my short list. I want to do a really deep dive, the 1995 adaptation. So we'll go back, or we'll go back to something from the 70s or even the 30s or something and analyze that. So it tends to be a mix.
I just add too that what we do is we don't just snark. We are a snark blog. I think we've very definitely fit into that niche of snarky commentary on costume history as it's portrayed in Hollywood. But what we also do is a lot of praise for the ones that get it right. And sometimes, and it's interesting, sometimes there's a bit of a mix in a single movie. Like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is a good example, where that Regency scene, and I was saying this earlier to Hilary, that I also had that moment recently where I sat up and I was watching it again for like the 900th time in my life. And I sat up and I saw that scene where Beethoven is basically kidnapped mid-concert by Bill and Ted, and I pinged immediately into, oh my God, the costumes are just really amazing in this. And then the rest of the costumes for the historical figures are kind of hit and miss, and it's just a silly little movie and everything, but that one scene, for sure, it stands out. And so sometimes we do talk about, what got right, what they got right, what we got wrong. Oftentimes there's a lot of praise, so we're not just snarky.
Well,
Sorry.
No, we're going to talk over each other. That's just going to happen. Go right ahead, Trystan.
I was going to say we try to add historical context a lot of times to a film or a movie in their costumes, and actually sometimes to the story itself if necessary, or if we're into it. But particularly if we're, especially I'd say if we're critiquing something, that's one of the things where we're not just saying, this sucks, it's not historical, or this sucks, it's ugly, and that's not what we're snarking, where we try to show, okay, well, here's some historical imagery, here's some examples of what would have been worn in the period, and that's why you're doing it wrong.
Okay. So I get, on the Bill and Ted test, I get a lot of people asking me if I will do other periods, because the premise of the Bill and Ted test is that I just test any screen adaptation, or it's a screen that's set in the Regency, whether it passes or fails, whether it's better or worse than the costumes in Bill and Ted. But I'm really strict about the time period, like ridiculously strict. It has to be set 1795 to 1825, and I will not do anything made before 1980 because of the kind of the costuming standards. So I've had quite a few people say, hey, can you do Tudor, or are you going to do Enola Holmes, or are you going to do 18th century? And I always just go, Frockflix, go to Frockflix. They do it, they've done it, that's it's covered. This is my really niche thing. I'm sticking in my lane. So yeah.
We also have that we have a hard cutoff with 1969 is our any film that's made before 1969, not set prior to 1969, but no, I'm sorry.
No,
I had that
Retake.
Cut.
So any film that's made prior to 1969.
Did it again.
No.
Oh my God, I did it again.
Okay.
Any film that is set before 1969 and set in an earlier time period than it is filmed. But if it is filmed in 1930 and set in 1930, we don't review it. And if it's 70s and onward, we live through it, we can't.
Yeah.
Which allows us to actually discuss the, what was it, the 1940s Pride and Prejudice, Rear Garson,
Yeah.
that monstrosity.
Well, he's still my Darcy. I'm not a big Darcy girl, and I definitely take Laurence Olivier over, you know, all the later ones. Sorry, I know, like, that's
Not even Colin Firth.
Yeah, interesting.
sorry.
You are definitely in the minority there, Hilary.
But someone's got to love him, like, you know.
But
everyone
I'm
else
way
has
out in
got
left field
comfort.
because I'm a Henry Tilney girl.
I'm a Wentworth
I'm
girl.
not a
That's
Darcy.
the problem.
Henry
Captain
understands muslin.
He understands muslin.
He understands muslin.
And he has hair.
I like Captain Wentworth though.
Yes.
Captain
Yes,
Wentworth.
Captain Wentworth.
Yeah, all the good textiles, right? He's got, like, forget about buying the muslin. He's got it from source. Like, it's,
That is sweet. Well, let's now that we're kind of off on Jane Austen characters and films, anyone can start. Whoever wants to talk about this, let's start with the good. Who has an adaptation that you think handled costumes particularly well? Any adaptation of any Jane Austen novel, any period? Does anybody have a place you'd like to start?
2020 Emma. For my money, that's the best costumed Jane Austen adaptation ever. Personally, I like the 1995 Persuasion better. Same costume designer, but just for sheer glorious detail based on historical research, oh, wow, I was in heaven. I think it's slightly too fashionable. Everybody's at the same level of fashion, and especially Mr. Woodhouse, like, he wouldn't have been doing that. And Mr. Knightley with his kind of, you know, the collars going up there. But overall, for my money, that's the best one. But that's just me.
I agree in some ways. I think maybe everyone is too fashionable for living in this tiny little village in the middle of nowhere. But yes, for actually going to the fashion plates and finding that crazy, like the ruffs, the weird ruffs. They come out of fashion plates, or the crazy bonnets or things like that. Yeah, I can agree with that. There are others that I think are, yes, Persuasion is it 95?
95,
Yeah. I mean, that's so good on so many levels. And it's not just the costumes. In some ways, it's the fact that the costumes they haven't done that, like, let's make them relatable. But they're very realistic. And so is the story, so is the acting, all of that. It's probably not the best, but I do have a thing for Sense and Sensibility from 95. I mean, they did some tweaks, but overall the look is so beautiful and also feels very natural. Whereas the most recent Emma did feel a little arch.
And I fully agree. I mean, the most recent Emma, it felt arch. I think the story wants to feel arch because the characters have this. Well, Emma herself has that kind of. She has that way about her that lends herself to that very kind of artificial, heightened sense, and
superficial. She's very superficial. Yeah.
And the current, the most recent adaptation emphasizes that, from the costume, the production design, everything, the way it's filmed, like all over the place. It really just makes that super prominent.
I thought it looked like you just opened a box of macaroons. They were just beautiful. Like, everything was just candy coated and perfect. And but I have the biggest soft spot in the universe for the 1995 Pride and Prejudice. I'm really rooted in that, and I maybe there needs to be like a psychological exploration as to why. It probably happened at a very seminal time in my life. I think I was about 17 when it came out, so I very much fixated on that. But even that has its kind of critiques that you can make about everybody's in the perfect little white dress. Everything is very clean and very sanitized. Even though it does, I think, represent better the scope of Pride and Prejudice, the novel, because it, of course, goes through many, many episodes in order to do that. Nothing really gets condensed too much, but the costuming is very twee. But it, you like what you like.
and I love that one to bits and can watch it endlessly and have. One thing I like about that, because I'm a known hater of the little white dresses, find them boring nightgowns and little sacks, and they just look like crap in my modern eye, appropriate to the period, but my personal taste. What I love is the Bingley Sisters. Because that's classic film costume. You paint, the bad characters to, stand out in a certain way, but they're done in a way that's appropriate to the period. So they are wearing very fashionable clothes in these brighter colors with the accessories, with the feathers and the hair and the turbans and all that are, straight out of fashion plates. But there's such a huge contrast between the Bennet sisters and their simple little white dresses and all that, and their fresh little faces. And so it's great. It's great costume design and it's historical. So it's that perfect marriage that on Frock flicks we so rarely see, where it's it's just done for the film. It's heightened the characters, but it's terribly unhistorical. In this case, in Pride and Prejudice 95, it's the marriage of both, and that makes me very happy.
Plus, it's still at the point where they decided to put their lead actresses in period appropriate wigs rather than just doing whatevs with the hair, which, the half up hair kind of, as it's got to be, it's up, so it's ye oldie, but it's down, so she's ye hot. There's this, you can completely see what the marketing department's been doing, and it sort of shifts in the 21st century. But Jennifer Ely wore a wig. She thanked her wig at the BAFTAs, and it's one of the things that, looking back, it really makes the film, makes the series.
I suspect hair is a hot button issue for all of us.
Yeah.
Remember that, what is it, the great bobby pin?
The great bobby pin shortage. I reported on that. It was hot breaking news that there was a long time sort of conspiracy and cover up over the fact that Hollywood was running out of hairpins. And so, yes, then there was a quota. Each production got 2. They had to share them. It was very complicated. And that is the reason behind the fact that everyone's hair looks like mine nowadays on screen. And yes, the messy bun. Oh God. I will say I thought Jennifer L.A.'s hair was a tiny bit much for Regency, with the little, I don't know, maybe it's just that it's more 1820s than 1810s.
I heard
I'm
a story.
But yes, the fact that it's up, and I do think that having hair be appropriately styled, to me, is such a key thing to understanding historical worlds, and particularly the world of Jane Austen. This is not, yes, it's a natural world. It's normal people living their lives, but they're very image conscious, status conscious, occasion conscious, all of these things. And so the idea that you're just kind of cash and hanging out, their version of cash and hanging out is still so much more put together than ours. And I feel like it's one of those things that, when done right in a story, like the most recent Emma, although again, even that was maybe more than it needed to be, but still, for a modern viewer to understand any historical period, but in particular the world of Jane Austen, I think hair tells you something about society.
Sarah, you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to put in an anecdote that, and this is my entire thing, I have these weird anecdotes that I continually, my brain will cough up, but I remember reading somewhere that Jennifer Ely had actually cut her hair very, very short in anticipation of needing to wear wigs on set. And then she gets on set for the role, and they freak out because they had been planning to work her natural into whatever hairstyles they were going to work with. And so she had to have an entire reworking of all of her hairstyles that were all based on wigs. That was an anecdote that I remember reading about. Do that with what you will. But yeah, hair is an interesting, hair and makeup. Makeup is another one that comes up a lot. It's very telling on when the film was made, what was considered beautiful at the time for a leading actress to have. So you get in the 90s, and since we're speaking about a 90s film, and you see this a little bit in the 95 Pride and Prejudice, the smoky eyeshadow and a little, just a little bit of these kind of nods to what, modern makeup was considered beautiful at the time.
Lipstick,
yeah, these very like browns, the natural palette. That natural palette was very popular at the time, and so you see that creeping in around the corners in these, and it makes the film look dated. So that's another aspect of it, where when you start to incorporate modernity, hair, makeup wise, even if you've got a perfect costume, in 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to look back on that and be like, oh gosh, that is very much made in the 90s.
And the eyebrows.
The eyebrows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, we're noticing these small things, because they are much smaller changes. Because I'm a big fan of, like Turner movie classics, and so we briefly mentioned the 40s Pride and Prejudice, because back in the studio system in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, it was contractual that actors and actresses especially kept their modern face, think Betty Davis, especially Betty Davis, with whatever, the penciled shape of the brows and the particular lipstick and all that, even if they're doing a period film, that was a requirement. And because the studios thought, nobody will recognize Betty Davis in a period film unless she has her Betty Davis face, or Greer Garson in the Pride and Prejudice, or whoever. So I think we've come a long way. So there's, so I'll give some things a pass, just having that kind of context, because it could be a lot worse. But then sometimes, I'm thinking, was it Sanditon? Where there's some way with more of the thick, more to 21st century brows and makeup, whereas the 90s, it was kind of, and I don't remember what the actual kind of modern fashions were then. Maybe it was more subtle, but it swings, it comes and goes, and it would be really cool to see like comparison of brows through the ages.
I do have a hair series and I need to get, because 1960s is next, where I'd look at the contemporary decade, what was fashionable, and then how does that affect the historical hair we see on screen. And yes, brows would be excellent.
We're definitely going through a long hair period. Like I watch my students and uni students and things like that, look at what young women are doing, and it's all like we're still in this huge kind of long Kardashian hair. So this idea that hair up, I think it's just kind of, it's seen as inherently unattractive or slightly dowdy because hot women don't do that, or kind of attractiveness is not marked by that. So yeah, you could, I've been watching what hair's doing, and then how they portray hair, and kind of have this, strange, like, we're going to do this, but don't worry, she's still cool, kind of mediation, but not change about the things. And I also think things like Game of Thrones doesn't help. The kind of the line between fantasy and historical. Like, I'm sure actually the great half up hair started with Lord of the Rings, and then it all just, it's been there before, but I think that kind of validated a whole lot of pseudo historical fantasy stuff. And then you get, the Borgias and the Tudors, and then there's no hairpins left anywhere.
I was thinking about, just as we were talking about your Bill and Ted test, and I think another good test would be, what are the supporting characters wearing versus the leading actresses? Because, for example, again, so the 95 Pride and Prejudice maybe has a few too many short sleeves and low necklines for Day. But if you take Jennifer Ailey out, although she's not too bad, she tends to have more like burgundy lipstick, which would be like complete horror time in actual Regency. But if you look at Jane and the various sisters, they all look great. And then Mrs. Bennet showing the age difference, all of that. So I think with a lot of these films, if we could just take the lead characters out and look at everyone else, that would,
as we call it, leading character syndrome, leading lady syndrome, or leading man syndrome. You got to make them look relatable.
Yeah.
That's a
I
very
think
good point.
another big thing that you need for sure are proper underwear. So I know Jennifer Ailey thanked her wigs. She also, I don't know if it was in an interview or what, but I remember her thanking her corsets, you know, but again, all of these things are so fundamental to the era. The idea of being restrained and the, you know, sitting upright and things are all where they should be and nothing's just sort of going crazy applies to hair, applies to bodies, applies to all of those things. And if you don't have those things, then it's just terrifying. Or not terrifying, it just doesn't get the period.
I failed the 1981 Pride and Prejudice, because basically they look like they're all just braless little Laura Ashley. You know, they've got that completely turn of the 80s kind of silhouette, and it's just, oh, what was one of the things that really contributed to, no.
So we've talked a bit about what was right and what was wrong. In the Bill and Ted test, were there things that specifically stood out to you about that Beethoven scene that were correctly done? Were there specific elements? Was it details on the costumes? Was it the hair?
A lot of it is the hair. It was all put together really, really well. And the costumes themselves are good. The proportions are good. The shapes are good. And one of the interesting things that happened with the Bill and Ted test is that a lot of people were sending it to Ed Solomon, who wrote Bill and Ted, saying, have you seen this? And he was very kind and went, yeah, I've seen it and I think it's great. And then he CC'd in Jill O'Hannison, who's the costume designer for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And she said, yeah, we were filming in Italy, so we had access to all of the great Roman costume stores. And you're like, of course. So they could pull from all of these, you know, fantastic Italian traditions of understanding historic dress and then put it together really well. But it's just all of those little things that make a great costume: the proportion, the trimmings, the accessories, the way that it sits, the way the light falls on the fabric, the mix of costumes, how you can tell what the class is. I think there's a couple of beards on fellas in the back, but I just overlooked that. And it was kind of an overall rightness in all of the small details that added up to just a beautiful, comprehensive look. I'd say, would you say that as well, that's sort of what you're picking up on in the scene?
Yeah, now that you mentioned that it was an Italian costume, you know, that they had access to the Italian costume houses, I'm thinking Tirelli costume, you know, which is one of the greats in European costume houses. And that makes sense. That makes total sense, because I didn't realize that that was a thing. I tried to do a little bit of research on that particular scene, and all it really would turn up is if you look up Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure costumes, it just turns up the information, kind of very general information. So it's really cool to have that confirmation that they had that access.
They said they filmed all of the historical bits in Europe, so a lot of that costuming came from there, and I think you can sort of see some of the differences. Like once you know it, you can see that style coming through.
Yeah, the Napoleonic soldiers, they just give that very broad scene, and you kind of just see a flash of it go by, and then they also looked really good. So one of the things that I'm trying to learn more about is uniforms, particularly of the Napoleonic era, since it's a very, very popular time period to set historical films in, and so I'm trying to learn more about it. But that was one thing to my eye that read very, very good about it as well.
I've got a couple of commentators who are Napoleonic reenactors.
They're very sticklery.
I love it. I keep telling them they need their own Twitter account just to do the uniforms. I would so read that. Every time they come in with it, well, no, but this isn't right and this isn't right. I'm like, guys, do it so we can read it.
I'm very, you know, the three of us are very good friends with many, many reenactors of different types, and who are very, very knowledgeable of the particular era that they're in. And I have been really trying hard to get one of the Napoleonic 18th century, early 19th century guys that I know to write us something about Napoleonic era costumes, because we really don't have that knowledge. What we focus on is female costumes. We're women, so that's what we focus on. But yeah, I'm trying to learn, and I'm probably getting it, you know, 90% wrong. But
I will say we always get excited when the horse people pop up, because
Yes,
always
the horses.
critiquing the gear that the horse is wearing in particular, and then also the way that someone is riding the horse. You know, like the positioning of the body and that kind of thing. And again, it's not something I know about, but I just love that there are these other subgroups of whatever out there being super irritated. And oh no, we lost.
Yeah, I believe Hilary dropped out.
I think she had to recycle. She froze.
Yeah.
Probably
Okay.
got kicked
That's
out. We can pause.
awesome.
I'm so sorry about that. My internet sometimes just drops out, and it really likes to do it when I'm on a call.
Oh,
So
It's something important. I know Zoom is all smoke and mirrors. Look, I've turned my television it's out of the frame, so I look like I'm just sitting in this lovely arts and crafts parlor.
That's what sipping your tea and writing letters.
Like
We were
I
just
always do.
since we're taking a break, we were just discussing, like, are there specific things we need to be focusing on? And I was suggesting that we maybe focus in on some specific films. And Laura was suggesting the Keira Knightley Pride and Prejudice. I was just saying I actually recently watched half of the 1972 Emma. It was not a good, it's lovely. It's just that 1970.
Yes.
1972.
Hey, but anyway.
Romola Garai.
Oh, I love that Emma, yeah. I want to, you know what I need to do? I want to pull up a list of Jane Austen adaptations so that I can remember to reference specific ones. Because, I'd forgotten about the Romola Garai one, and I really liked it.
Yeah, I like that one too.
The Kate
All the
Beckinsale.
Gwyneth ones.
That's my favorite.
There was only one Gwyneth one I hated. So, but I don't know if that's for the costuming. I think mostly I hate things for performances more than
We should also see, I've got a list now of, Love and Friendship, the Mansfield Park one, like Becoming Jane.
And that trio of terrible ITV ones, the Mansfield Park
with Billy Piper.
Abbey.
With Billy Piper. Oh, terrible.
Okay, we need to start pulling up a list of specific films to talk about.
Yeah, I'm not sure who our audience is going to be here. I have a feeling it's going to be more Janeites and less costume people. But this was all very open-ended, so I think it's all good. I think
as long as they have some idea what the movies are we're talking about, which if they're Janeites they will, then those ITV adaptations, the worst one. What's her face? I can't remember the actress's
Billy
name.
Piper.
Thank you, from Doctor Who.
Billy
with
Piper.
tits and hair everywhere.
Hair everywhere, and she's in like 1790.
Save it for the recording. Don't pop your.
Okay, you're right. Yes, don't blow your wad.
What year was that other? There was that other Persuasion. I'm so bad on years today.
That was the 2000s one. It wasn't bad.
2009.
Oh man, they just needed to. I know, it's all about the second bloom and the whatever all those other lines are. But she was just. It was a little too. She's too sad. She's a little just too. What did Captain Wentworth see in her?
Which one are we talking about again?
So 2000s.
Oh.
2009 with Sally Hawkins with her hair gelled down.
Yes!
Weird little spiky fringe at the front.
I love the performances in that one though, but the clothes and the hair were just so mournful.
There's another one coming up. They just announced the casting for New Persuasion with Sarah Snook, who's Australian. Well, and she's been in some television show that I don't know, but apparently she's sort of making it big in America. But she's playing Anne Elliot. So
here's a thought: what if we just look at specific books? So the various versions of Persuasion, the various versions of Emma. What do you like? What didn't you like, or whatever?
Okay, that sounds great. Shall I make a moderatory statement about that?
Yeah, sure. Throw us a book and we can talk about the various versions.
I will. I'll throw you a book. So let's talk about some specific costuming and film adaptations of Jane Austen novels. And let's begin at the beginning with her first published novel, Sense and Sensibility. Anybody want to jump in with your favorite or non-favorite adaptation?
I'm going to go the 1995, right? It's the 90. The Emma Thompson. It took a while to grow on me. Initially, when it came out, and I think that this was something that ties back into my fixation on the 1995 Pride and Prejudice, was when it came out in the theaters. it was so very colorful in my mind. And I remember thinking that doesn't look like the Regency to me. Regency is pretty little white dresses. And but over the years, I've gone back and rewatched numerous times, and every single time I'm just blown away by the aesthetics, the color, because it was a colorful period. It wasn't all just white, white dresses. And they have the Kate Winslet's wearing the copy of a gown, 1790s overgown in the Victoria and Albert Museum, I believe. It's got all those tiny little pleats in the back. And the moment I twigged that was something that they did, I went, oh, they knew what they were doing.
Did anyone have a problem with the fact that the period there was pushed back a bit?
I like it because I find 1790 so much more attractive than later eras of the Regency. It's a bit more of that classical look, and it still has some connections to the 18th century, which aesthetically I like better than the flip side being like the 1820s, where everything is puffy and twee and all of that. The one thing I was going to say about that 95 Sense and Sensibility, these are such nitpicks, but the way that they wear those overrobes as coats, essentially, they wear them as outerwear when actually they would have been something that would have been like more of a formal thing. So it would have shown you were more dressed up, like for a ball or something like that. That's a total nitpick. Side note, if you can get the DVD of that, which I no longer have, Emma Thompson does a oh God, what do you call it when the commentary track? That is so fascinating. I used to watch that movie with that commentary track probably more than I watched it with the actual audio. And one of my favorite things is there's this particular pig head that's in all the dinner scenes, and she'll laugh and be like, there's that pig head again. But she has all of these great insights into her adaptation and then the filming as well. Sorry, side note.
No, great note.
Great side note.
Because they said it when it was first written. So they said it in Eleanor and Marianne period, not Sense and Sensibility period, which, so that pushes it back into the 1790s, which I really like, but not liking the aesthetic detail, just to jump to another one, that's exactly why the 2005 Pride and Prejudice is set in the first impressions composition period rather than of, the late 1790s rather than the 1812s, because Joe Wright, the director, thought that Regency dresses made everyone look pregnant and fat, and he didn't like it. So, the choices for that are, yeah. But I was working in a cinema when Sense and Sensibility came out, like a really proper old-fashioned cinema where you could hear the film in the workroom. So I heard that film like probably 50 times during that time that it came out. So I've got this I watch it and I realize I can recite whole chunks of dialogue that I didn't even know were there. So I'm quite fond of it. But I think it's beautiful. But the thing that bothers me every single time is Emma Thompson's hair with these little the little cornrowy twists. And I know it's to make use of her short hair, but there's so many other things you could have done. And every time I'm sort of like, and how did they, and why? And I kind of get lost in strands of hair. It's ridiculous, but.
Yeah, the little twists. That is.
The little twists.
Lots of little, curls and coils around the hairline, probably to blend it in if they're wearing wigs and hair pieces. But I do want to add too that was actually costumed by Jenny Bevan, who is a fantastically knowledgeable historical costumer who has done many, 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 many costume films. So yeah, that one sticks out for me I used to hate it, but now I love it because I know more now.
Go ahead.
I have always loved that one. Again, a lot of it's because of the performances and the screenplay. It's beautifully adapted. It really carries the best parts of the book are on screen, which is really all you can ask for. And the costumes, I think, it's funny. Sarah mentioned that they felt bright to her. To me, it seems that this kind of nice balance between a lot of the very white and something that might be very, very bright. It seems very kind of just very well balanced cinematography wise and costume wise, and I really appreciate that. speaking of the hair, I always think, I never noticed the little cornrows or whatever, braids in Emma Thompson's hair, but I always think of Kate Winslet's hair as always, they're so blousy and so flowing around, and I'm thinking, what a mess. It's beautiful. It's really, it's, again, film-wise, it's beautiful. It fits the character. Marianne's very kind of young and floaty and kind of free-spirited and kind of a little ridiculous, but it's a mess, period-wise, because it's like, girl, keep your hair together. Where's those bobby pins? Why is it always like bits flowing around everywhere?
Except I will say I like that the curls are very contained, and compare that to the 2008 Sense and Sensibility.
Oh, it could be worse, obviously.
Yeah, which is completely frizzy hair. I just slept in it and I woke up and sort of stuck one bobby pin in it. So we'll give it that. There is one particular scene in Sense and Sensibility, and it's the one where, oh God, I'm forgetting character names, bear with me. Edward, played by Hugh Grant, comes to visit Eleanor. Oh, Christ. And I think it's when he comes to make the offer about when Colonel Brandon is gonna, like, oh God, I can't remember specifics. They're in a drawing room. It's very restrained. Emma Thompson is, help me out, Hilary.
Yeah, so they're in London, and she's been tortured by Lucy Steele because she's got this secret engagement, and Colonel Brandon has offered has offered the living. She's got to make an offer to him from Colonel Brandon so that he can get married.
Yes.
And it's all kind of restrained emotion and kind of.
Yeah. And Emma Thompson has one of those perfectly made Regency dresses. Yes, 1790s, maybe a little slim for it, but it's got these perfect, it's the white sheer muslin, and it's got the perfect little, the really tight gathers in the center back, and then this train, and it's just this so beautiful and plain and so perfect for the scene. And then she sits, and she's clearly in a full corset because, they have the proper posture. And then it's all because one of the things I love about Jane Austen is the restraint that they're all having to deal with, where they can't just say, hey, I love you, or you broke my heart, or you're a jerk, or whatever, or I hate you, whatever they want to say, they can't say it. And that is just such a scene that is so rife with that restraint. And then the costumes just so fit in that perfect classical ideal, and the posture and all of that. Oh, and I love it.
Can I just interject one thing?
Please do.
Emma Thompson's fringe. Can we talk about the bangs? That was another thing when we started talking about the hair and then the little twists and everything. And I pulled up a photo of her and I went, oh, that's right, the fringe. That part, it's not in her eyes, which is good, but it also still reads kind of modern. But
I have a whole thing about Regency Bangs, and it relates to War and Peace, the recent adaptation with, oh God.
Davidson.
Thank you. Anyway, where Regency, yes, they sometimes had short fringe, but they either brushed it to the sides, brushed it all to one side, or curled it. It was not just,
It wasn't bumper bangs.
Yeah. And I'm looking at pictures of the 2008 Sense and Sensibility, and Eleanor's got the clunk, bangs. People seem to get excited that, oh, we can have bangs, and then they do it very 1980s.
The problem is they don't do it far enough back,
Mhm.
because Regency fringes or bangs actually start behind the ear, and so they cut them or they costume them like from the front there. But when you look at the pictures, it's the whole kind of, you've got the front hair and then the back hair. So actually your fringe starts there, and no one's willing to do that because, of course, once you have that and you have the long hair, you've got a mullet. All these Regency women are rocking mullets, and nobody wants to put your actress in a mullet. But, every single picture, it kind of starts back here, and that's where you get that longer, blousy kind of look.
That dates back to 18th century hairstyles, which from about 1780 onward were short or shorter from about here forward and longer in back. And men's 18th century hairstyles going all the way back to about the 1730s similarly have, you had your toupee, it was called, which is where we get our modern term toupee, and your queue, which was the long hair and back. And you will see it on every single, for sure, 18th century man. You will see this demarcation of shorter here, longer and back. Anyway, it was just a fundamental. So yeah.
So I believe we started to touch on the 2005 Keira Knightley adaptation of
Keira Knightley, Homespun Princess.
Everybody looks like they were caught in a rainstorm.
You mean Pride and Prejudice and Pigs?
Everyone just looks rode hard and put away wet. The Bennets are way too poor with a pig living in their living room. And if we're going to specifically costumes, again, everyone's wearing mud-colored homespun like it's 1372 in, you know, I know, but in I don't know, the remotes of Finland. I don't know, but it's just this mud pig fiesta, and it's bad. Yeah.
I like it. I like it, and I'm in it. I was costumed for it. I got to see it all like firsthand. Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Where are you in it?
So I was sort of in Hampshire, living in Hampshire at the time, and we knew they were doing this production, and a whole lot of us who were kind of studying or around this history of textiles degree we were doing, we got asked to be costumed kind of supervision extras in the Netherfield ball scene. Oh. So what we had to do was protect the historic house that they were filming in from all of the kind of plebby extras, from, you know, touching the walls and setting their hair on fire and things like that. So we spent 4 days being dressed up and being in the ball scene, which was, I was sick as a dog. I had a cold. I felt terrible, but it was great. So I kind of was immersed in that world and what I really liked about it. And I don't know if, you know, even when I watch it, I don't sort of pick it up, but there was no makeup allowed on any of the extras. There is, and like people were chucked off set for wearing mascara or eyeliner. And they really wanted people who had this kind of more, you know, natural look. But when you look at it, there's a kind of, it is, yeah, a little bit more homespun, a little bit more natural, but there's not a scrap of makeup, lots of hair. But yeah, it was great. I mean, I'm not quite sure about the whole Netherfield ball. Everyone's in cream and white or black. It's very sort of aesthetically controlled, but it was good fun. And I was Matthew McFadden's mark to walk off to after he asks Lizzie to dance.
I'm watching it right now. I'm trying to find it.
You can see me if you know where to look. When Mary's asked not to, you know, she's delighted us long enough with her piano playing. So yeah, I suppose I'm again slightly biased and quite fond of it. But when I watch it again, I mean, apart from Keira Knightley, who I think was not a good casting choice for Lizzie, and again, half up hair, my God. I quite like the aesthetics. I quite like the design. I think this is one that polarizes a lot of costume fans or Austen fans, but I fall on the I like it side, while completely understanding, Kendra, why a lot of things about it irritate you.
I'm sure if you were there, that you know, that's an emotional attachment. And also, again, you weren't focusing in on the lead characters. You were looking at the crowd and the supporting characters and all of that. And sure, I mean, there's plenty that's fine. It's just that the Bennets are too poor. And then Caroline Bingley in her sleeveless dress.
Sleeveless dress, yeah.
And again, the hair just being so frowsy. Go, Trystan.
It's not even the sleeveless dress that bugs me the most. Caroline Bingley's red dress. So to contrast, I'm going to contrast it with the 95 because, you know, it's there. So in 95, the Bingley sisters, both of them, they're the height of fashion, and in a way that is historical and emphasizes that the characters are snobby, rich, you know, socially conscious and all that, class conscious and all that. And in the 2005, Caroline Bingley is dressed in these things, and especially the red dress is the one that pisses me off the most. That it doesn't do anything. It's not the height of fashion. It just stands out. And it stands out in a way, in a filmmakery way, that usually a red dress it's the slutty character, it's the bitchy character, it's there's a lot of iconic things why you would put one character especially in a red dress, and none of those really fit for this character. Yes, she's bitchy, but she's bitchy for a lot of very specific reasons in the text. And if you're not going to do that, then why are you using this costume? So it's misreading the text and misusing a film costume cue. And it's screwing with historical costumes. So it's wrong on so many levels that it just, there's no point to it. You know?
I've never thought about the red dress, and now when I watch it again, that's all I'm going to see.
Yeah.
I was just looking at pictures of the red dress, and it's a very beautiful gown. You're talking about the one where they're doing the turn about the room, it's so refreshing scene. Is that the one you're talking about? Yeah.
It's the bright, it's screaming bright red dress. It's actually been reused in other productions with like stuff over it and stuff. And it's a fine dress on its own. But again, using it in the film this way.
It's absolutely, when you see the juxtaposition between what Keira Knightley is wearing as Elizabeth Bennet and her very drab linen, everything is hanging and sort of just on her. The contrasting of that with this very elegant figure, and she's very fashion forward, but it does read very jarring, and you don't get that same sense, that kind of same play in other adaptations that I've seen where it's so different between the two characters.
So
Kendra, did you have something?
Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody else has anything to add? So we've talked about some Sense and Sensibilities. We've talked about some Pride and Prejudices. Earlier, we discussed a couple of adaptations of Emma. Any Mansfield Park comments? Any persuasion?
Have they done a decent Mansfield Park? Well,
I like the mid-90s version.
The 80s is actually... I did on the Bill and Ted test, because I was sort of, I got to the end of the Austens. I did a ranking of all the various costumed adaptations for each one. And the 1981 Mansfield Park came out top for costume. It was actually really nice.
Yeah.
But it's been done a disservice, I think. I don't think we've had like Mansfield Park is possibly the most misunderstood or misliked, or again, whether you're for or against Fanny Price, I think she irritates so many people and nobody quite knows what to do with her on screen. And you don't turn her into Billie Piper, you really don't. I think we've all got that established. That's not a successful casting choice.
No.
Also,
yes,
Fanny Price is not about tits and hair. Like,
oh really?
Okay,
like
very few Jane Austen characters are.
But it's like you take the Pope
the least
and you make the Pope tits and hair. No, these two things do not go together. Can I just jump back in on Mansfield Park and say,
please do.
The 2007 one is atrocious on 50 million gazillion levels. The 95 one, it doesn't get the book and it doesn't get Fanny Price. I will say that I think the sisters are well dressed. I like what they do with, Mariah's husband, whose name I've forgotten.
Grant Crawford.
Oh, right.
Yeah, who's played by Hugh Bonneville in an earlier role.
Yeah.
I do think what they do costume-wise with Fanny in particular, they give her these very schoolgirl pinafore looks that are just not, it's schoolgirl pinafore like 1890s or something, or like Edwardian, sort of married with Regency. So that, I mean, again, they didn't know how to handle her character. Mm-hmm. But again, if you can look past her, and then who's the foil, the girl?
Mary Crawford.
Thank you. Why I can't remember anyone's name.
Oh, I thought you meant the actress.
Henry Crawford.
Yeah, Mary Crawford is a definitely too modernized, and they're trying to show that she's evil and seductive or whatever. But again, if you can look past those people, and of course, then there's the pug.
Because in the 2007 one, the other weird thing about what they did with Billie Piper is, so Fanny Price is supposed to be sort of, she doesn't know how to dress and stuff like that, but she does know not to wear 1790s dresses in, you know, wherever we are. Mansfield Park's dating sort of quite uncertain. We're definitely in like at least sort of 1807 to sort of, you know, 1810. And she's wearing these really old dresses that's such a heavy-handed, like, look, she not fashionable, very bad kind of. It's so lumpen and awkward, and yeah, one of the many. Well,
and again, if you're going to costume Fanny Price correctly, I would think you would want her in very beige, nondescript colors and very buttoned up, very restrained, very like, if there's a choice between a frill and a no frill, Fanny's going to probably have no frill, and that's partially her own retiring character and also how other people see her and what they would be spending money on and all of that.
Mrs.
And again,
Norris is not going to let her have a frill.
No, exactly.
Possibly help it.
Yeah.
Persuasions. Any versions of Persuasion that we'd like to discuss? Yeah, that's my favorite.
Oh, Captain, my Captain.
Yeah,
Yes.
Kieran Hines for life.
One word for life. Just,
Yeah.
you know, it's all good.
Whoever
I'll
you
take him.
costume him is just fine.
Yeah, I don't care. Whatever he's doing, I'll take it.
We're not
You know,
wearing either. I don't know.
not picky.
That's another one where, again, the 95, okay, actually the hair might be a little sloppy. It's not bad, but
They've got the weird fringe on
Anne Elliot.
Anne Elliot. Yes,
Played by
But but
Hilary,
it's
we need you to supply all names.
right. Thank you. Thank you. Somebody has a brain for names.
Well, I spent like 6 years staring at Austen characters, so
Oh
there's
my
some
God.
Okay.
catch in. Yeah.
But I do think what they do with the hair, and I mean, we touched on the Fringe issue for a second on the Sense and Sensibility, 95 Sense and Sensibility. But in this particular adaptation, the Fringe is very, it's stringy and, you know, she's awkward. She doesn't have anyone to dress her hair because she's too busy, you know, basically being a servant to her crappy family. So she's doing the best she can. And I think it weirdly works.
But the thing is, I've seen those straight fringes. I mean, apart from the fact they're not cut along, I've seen lots of period illustrations of them. Once you get beyond fashion plates, which are a fantasy version of what's going on, when you look at watercolors, and so there's a picture of Jane Austen's niece Fanny at age like 12 or 13, and she's got this like just this really sort of straight, simple cut fringe, and then the rest of her hair, it's literally just chucked up and put in a chignon with a comb, and it's so simple and so straightforward. And in my book, I put in this great picture of Maria Edgeworth, well, it's thought to be Maria Edgeworth, and you can see that this poor woman has dead straight hair, and she's kind of tried to curl it, and you can see at the side where she's put a curl in, and it's just dropped straight out. And you can see, she's like, I've got it, and I've sort of like, I'm doing what I can, and I've got the rest up, but it's just not going to curl. And I love those kind of more kind of intimate, yeah, we're trying, but it's not going to happen moments.
Oh,
so
for
I sort
sure.
of, yeah, the sort of the straight fringe, I'm like, well, I've seen a lot of like
Attempts at it.
yeah, sort of like normal.
As someone who has
but
As someone who has hair that does not like to hold a curl, I super sympathize with that. So yeah, maybe I just go straight to it because it's one of those things where I struggle with that, and I want your hair to behave in a certain way when you're trying to be fashionable. But I do think that in this case, it does work for this character, and it does make her look dowdy. It does make her look, like she's just dealing with her atrocious family all the time, and she's sort of the one that gets crapped on constantly, and she's just doing the best she can to look as fashionable as she can, but she can't because so.
And they contrast that really well with her vile sister,
Yes,
Elizabeth, the really fashionable one who's as vain as the father, and she's so kind of, you can see this kind of this the strange attention to fashion that doesn't actually suit her and doesn't make her look better. It's just it's fashion for fashion's sake, and it's got such beautiful kind of subtle characterization like that. And what I also really like about this, Kendra, is I feel this one's got just enough mud. If Pride and Prejudice in 2005 is too muddy and Emma in 2020 is like too clean, this is the Goldilocks mud version.
Right.
Where, it's like just enough texture and just enough kind of creases and crumples to make it lived in and atmospheric, but without being, the kind of character smut that you sometimes see in like medieval things. It's like, look, I am a peasant, smut. Or, you know, Demelza in Poldark before she's pretty. You know, so it's that kind of, that beautiful daily texture that I love about that adaptation.
Yeah, agreed. And I also like, again, how they went with different looks that are appropriate to the period for different characters. And I'm thinking of, it must be Mrs. Croft, played by Fiona Shaw, and she's in these like turbans and very drapey. She's the bohemian type. And then again, the sister, who is very elegant and fashionable for fashion's sake. And then obviously Anne, who starts off very sort of plain Jane, and then in her own appropriate way blossoms. Like, it's not over the top. Yes, in many ways. But dress-wise, it's not over the top. It's not suddenly, she's not suddenly dressing like her sister or whatever, but she's just a little brighter, a little more opened up, a tiny bit more put together, etc. And then, oh God, yeah, Kieran Hines with the collars. Oh, the collars.
So good.
This would probably be a good point to touch on menswear, which we, other than speaking about uniforms, we haven't really talked specifically about men's costuming in Jane Austen adaptations. Anybody have any specific notes there?
I think it's generally better. I think on the whole, it's generally better. I get really annoyed by saggy breeches. You know, when they haven't put the braces on or haven't done the waistband up tight enough, and his crotch is kind of hanging down at his thighs. And it's just, it's not the look that it was going for. And you don't have to have it super skin tight, though I appreciate that too. But, you know, it's sort of like when they look like they're just, you just want to pull their trousers up. I think that's one of the things that really irks me on there. And yeah, and often like when menswear is really good, they get the fit right, which is often tighter than we expect to see. Like there's a little bit of strain. They're kind of more done up. It's not Austen, but I think they did this really well in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. They had this beautiful tightness to the clothing that was just what you see in the pictures. So I suppose it's sort of, yeah, I don't like baggy. I like crispness and pulled togetherness in men's dress, but it's usually better than the women. I usually have less critiques of women's dress than of men's than women's dress.
I think one that also made a really good men's silhouette, which was not also a Jane Austen film, which is the 2004 Vanity Fair. There was a lot of problems with the costumes in that, but they got that real just everything is pushed up to the neck and the shoulders look on all the gentlemen's costumes. And it stands as one of the only films that I can actually watch Jonathan Rhys-Meyers in and not hate him. So
you mentioned one of the shoulders, and I think that's one thing that the latest Sanditon, they went overboard. They did very modern. It was a very modern not boxy, actually, just it was a very modern suit look at the top of the men's coats. And it didn't have that kind of elegant fitted look to the shape. I mean, you could just see it if you're just kind of looking at front on images, and anytime a man was standing front on, and you could just see the shape, because there's more, there's a fit, and the shoulders kind of sit on the shoulders, and then they come in and they're fitted, as Hilary was saying. There's a fit, there's a tight custom fit. And I get it, you know, productions, a lot of things are off the rack, and probably for menswear especially, because you know, how often are you going to build a custom suit, a period suit for production? It's
unfortunately for Sanditon, they were custom made.
That's sad. That's really, I didn't
really good costume house.
A lot of the women's clothes were recycled though. So I'm surprised if any of the men's stuff was custom, because it looks like it's just kind of modern suits in structure. Again, a lot of the women's, we know they're recycled, so you know that's fine. But they didn't have the right shaping at all, and you know, I mean, it's sometimes it's more obvious than others. That was just one that stuck out. So
one of our readers,
go ahead.
one of our readers pointed out.
You go back further into things like, again, the 95 Pride and Prejudice. There, yeah, everything fits exquisite, and it shows.
Kendra, what did you have to add to that?
Just gonna say, one of our readers pointed out that most of the men in the most recent Emma look like they're wearing Levi's Dockers, and and the thing, again, the point that I want to make is, again, the fitting of the men's costumes again reflects the society that they're living in. This is a society that's about restraint, that's about following very particular social rules and social norms. This is not just a like, hey, we're hanging and everything's casual and, you know, everything's just out on the table. No, there are rules. And that's one of the most interesting things I think about Jane Austen, is she tells really good stories that also explain her era, which is fascinating because of course she was living in her era. So she didn't, you know, as an, like, it's like, as a sociologist, it's like this perfect example of how these rules worked and all of that. But anyway, the men are similarly not, you know, just free to do whatever. They too are governed by all of these social norms. And so when you see them in the essentially Levi's Dockers, you don't get that visually.
I think, and the thing I'm noticing, you know, for sort of mentioning Sanditon, the thing that really irks me in men's costuming, in the way that half up hair irks me in women's, is the new stubble. Oh, because, you know, they did it in Sanditon, and he's got this perma stubble the whole way through. And this is one of those things where you're like, nobody's thought about how you're going to do this. How do you get stubble with a straight razor? I mean, first of all, this is like one of the great clean shaven eras. It just didn't happen. But then how do you maintain a 1 or 2 mil perfect stubble when you're doing it with a straight razor? You can't do it. You have to have a modern electric razor to like get that cheekbone defining look. And they're doing it in the stills that come out for Bridgerton as well. He's got like stubble on here. And again, it's one of those modern, yes, hot is stubble. Like, look at him. He's not quite, as you say, like he's like a little bit rebellious, but I just want to like get in there and shave them.
Mm-hmm. I do. Yeah. On a modern man, oh, I'm all about facial hair, so yay, team that. But yes, historically, I'm just picturing, you know, like how I think it's at the beginning of Persuasion where they show the servants out on the lawn cutting the grass with scissors. I'm picturing that the lead actor in a chair for 10 hours while someone sits there with tiny scissors cutting this perfect stubble.
Yes, I love it. That's what he goes to the barber for.
That's how it happens.
That rich that he can afford to sit in the chair. Yeah, no, that would not be, it would not work. That's not how the period worked.
I think that's kind of that's what often annoys me about a lot of historical costuming, you know, Regency or generally, is when people don't understand the rules before they break them. You know, it's kind of just messed up for the sake of messing it up without going, all right, what are our parameters? Even if they're not the parameters of the world that it's in, what are we deciding the parameters are for this production? How do we decide the authenticity for this production to then know what we're doing? So that and you can tell when people are like, let's just make it up as we go along, or like, this looks great, and it doesn't have like a structure and a logic to it underneath that. And once you've got that, you can kind of do whatever you like. You know, I don't necessarily want minute pedantic accuracy on all the costumes. I just want consistency and like a really strong vision that comes through. And I think a lot of the productions that we're talking about, especially those kind of 2000s, the ITV ones, you can tell it's just like they haven't done history before. It's sort of like, oh, we'll put it together a bit like this and a bit like that, and without that deep understanding that someone like Jenny Bevan or Alexandra Byrne has, that they know when to push and when to hold back and what to get away with. Yeah, I think that's sort of so much is about lacking that infrastructure of thinking or logic about what's happening.
I agree. And also to some of the points Trystan was making, oh, how does this make sense for the character?
Yes.
You know, don't put the straight-laced character in a turban. you know, because the turban is supposed to show that they're artsy and whatever. And so, yeah, Caroline Bingley in the random red dress that's not actually working for the scene and the character, versus something like the 95 Pride and Prejudice, which we've already talked about, but, you know, where they're using, you know, different styles of the era. And again, yeah, if you want to go off script from the era, I'm fine with that. Of course, do something artsy, do something creative, put them all in, you know, grunge wear, whatever, but have a logic to it that makes sense for the characters, for the story, whatever. I mean, I think of all the times that people reset Shakespeare. I mean, that's just like such a thing that's done, and it can be done so well when it's done well, you know? One of the best productions of The Merchant of Venice I saw was contemporary Italian, you know, and oh my God, the suits on the men, everything was great because there was a coherency and it made sense for the story and the characters and blah, blah, blah.
That is such a good point. Thank you for making that. I was about to jump in with that Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Right now, we've got about 13 minutes left of our recording time. I just want to make sure if there was anything in particular that anybody wanted to touch on, that we get to those things as we kind of wind down here. Sarah? So we've talked about a lot of adaptations of Jane Austen's work, but we haven't talked about contemporary films that are about Jane Austen. Does anybody want to jump in here? Sarah?
Well, the two that come immediately to mind are Miss Austen Regrets and Becoming Jane, and they came out fairly close to one another, if I recall, right? Within a few years of each other. And they kind of took different approaches to the overarching story or biography of Jane Austen. And I particularly really love Becoming Jane. And costume-wise, I have quibbles. You know, everyone kind of has quibbles about things, but I think that they hit the right notes for the story that they were trying to tell. And I still haven't been able to get my hands on the biography that it was based on. So that it's been out of print for a number of years, and I desperately want to read it and find out how it compares to the actual movie. But yeah, I'd like to talk about that.
I found it quite strange how fashionable they made Jane Austen, that she was often sort of 5, sometimes even 10 years ahead of everyone else around her, which is so contradictory to how Jane Austen was in her clothing. And again, I felt it sort of had a slight touch of, you know, I'm an independent modern woman hair flick to the costuming in that sense. And then some of the details, like often when I look at it, the details are like, that's nearly right, and then it just goes wrong. It just sort of pips off a little bit. So I quite liked it, but I sort of kept going, but why is she so fashionable? And I found that, you know, there was an unevenness in the costuming that way. So maybe again, it's a case of, if we take Jane Austen out of the biography of Jane Austen, it might come out a bit better.
I
think it was leading lady syndrome, especially with
Anne Hathaway.
Anne Hathaway, thank you, who was hot at the time, like, you know, a big name actress and a big get for that kind of film. I think she did great with the material, English accent here and there, but I thought she actually did really well with the material. But yeah, her costumes compared to the rest of the cast really stood out as, you're right, like, you know, 10 to 15 years ahead fashionably, which would not have been, you know, the reality. I think it's set in the 1790s, and she's wearing full-on 18 teens half the time, or something vaguely approximating that.
Right. And then they have the cousin, who I love her wardrobe, because I am much more team 18th century over team Regency when it comes to style aesthetics, but Eliza, who's not that much older than her. And I know they're trying to say, oh, she's come from France, and so she's so much more glamorous, let's dress her different. But what they chose for different was slightly out of date, or at least early 1790s, but not late 1790s. And then they have I don't remember which character it is, but it's the Lady Catherine equivalent, in full 1780s with the big bushy hair and a full, you know, a low-waisted dress and, you know, all of that. And some of those, it just felt like all of those polarities were too extreme for me, knowing the period. Maybe if I didn't know the period, it would have worked, because, okay, I can really see these differences between characters, but.
I think Miss Austen Regrets worked a little better costume-wise, especially because it was a slightly older Jane Jane Austen, and so she wasn't super fashionable, and she was kind of she definitely had the feel of the relative cast adrift, which was her life, and that visually it worked, because she was kind of always kind of butting in and kind of being on the side, and she looked like that.
Mm-hmm. It had slightly that more elegiac quality that of Persuasion as well. It was kind of softer and more muted and a little bit more, Miss Austen regrets. And I think that really kind of toned through the costuming and the mood that came through with what they did with the clothing there as well.
I was just so thrilled that somebody finally figured out that Greta Scacchi, I think I'm pronouncing that right, but I'm not sure. I'm never sure on that name. And Olivia Williams are just dead ringers for each other. And every time I'd be like, no, they're separated at birth. And it made me so happy they were cast as sisters. It's the small joys.
I do remember with Miss Austen Regrets, the rest of the cast, the families, particularly the Austen family itself, looked very good. I thought for that sort of countrified, gentle, genteel country, late 1790s look, without being too fashionable, but also not too backward in fashion. And then in Miss Austen Regrets, I think the thing that always kind of I loved about the movie, but also had a hard time swallowing about the movie was just the champagne swilling, I'm anti-Mame, like she was kind of the anti-Mame of the, that's how they cast her. And I was like, okay, I get that. Jane Austen is neither, she's a human being, right? So I think that if you were to smush those two movies together, you would probably get a real person. But they both took it to sort of extremes, I think, on either side of the, prim and proper, and who the cares? I'm a party girl. Like that, neither of those rang really true to me, just, based on what I know of Jane Austen. But
I remember it. Go ahead.
What you said about the costuming of the family, her relatives, that's what the Bennets should have looked like in the 2004 Pride and Prejudice. That would have been perfect.
If I'm not mistaken, a couple of those costumes got reused actually in the sister's costume in Becoming Jane was actually something that was worn by one of the other sisters in the 2005 Pride and Prejudice. So there was some costume reuse.
I'm executive decisioning a side topic in that we have not discussed the Gwyneth Paltrow Emma, which I thought
that's fine. We can
You're good with that? Okay.
Yeah,
I'm still so offended that they made Harriet so dumpy. And I love Toni Collette, Muriel's Wedding. I am Muriel. But you don't go making my girl dumpy, and then she's in no way in competition. And then Gwyneth with the 90s, like I can't. Yeah.
And then Ewan McGregor's hair, like Scarecrow.
Yes.
I don't know if you ever saw Wurzel Gummidge. It might have been sort of more of a British thing, but like John Pertwee is this living scarecrow. That's what was going on there.
Yeah. That one was so heavily. I mean, you can date it to the Tuesday that they filmed it on. Sorry.
Yeah. And I mean, I really like the Kate Beckinsale Emma. That I really
that's my favorite.
That's beautiful. That's my favorite sort of adaptation of Emma. I thought they did a really nice job in the costumes there as well. One of the the good late 90s batch.
The hats are so good. And apparently they decided that Kate Beckinsale said, I'm not a bonnet girl. And so they made her all about hats, and it worked so well for the character. I also love the Roma Ligari one. I think the Kate Beckinsale one is costumed the best. The Roma Ligari one is good because it feels very relatively true to the novel, and it takes its time. It has more time to tell the story. And
although the hats in that, because I watched it again the other day, they're not actually bonnets. They've just taken those large 18th century bergère hats and squashed them onto their head with a ribbon. So you've got this sort of strange tube effect, and it happens every time. They haven't given them an actual proper hat. They've just kind of knocked one up. And
Yeah.
once you start to notice it, you're like, wait a second, did they do any millinery here, or did they just
Millinery pet
improvise?
peeve. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't just take any old hat and turn it into a gypsy bonnet. It just doesn't work. Well, I believe that's time for us. I want to thank everybody for being here today and taking part in this lively and entertaining discussion. Thank you, Sarah, Kendra, and Trystan from Frock Flicks. It's been wonderful talking to you. And Hilary, fantastic. You really enlivened the costume discussion with your Bill and Ted test. Thank you so much for your contributions to film costume criticism with that test. Thank you all for being here.
I'm really pleased to meet you all. You know, sort of that senior work, and Kendra, I'm friends with Jane Malcolm Davies, so we, you know, I've sort of come across in conversation, and yeah, so it's really, really nice to be able to do this, and I was thrilled when Anna suggested doing a panel together. So thank you, you've been great. I really enjoyed this.
We need to interview both of you for Frock Flip.
Yeah, that'd be, I'd love to.
I'm really sorry I have a migraine and I have been like at half mast. So
Wow.
Fantastic at half
I
power.
drank all the coffee, so I hope I made up for some of that chattiness.
That's Mike. All right. Well, this was fun. Let's all stay in touch. And
yeah, it was fun. It was
Guys,
great
good to meet you guys.
Work, and you know, see you around.
all right.
All right.
Great.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
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 Bye.